This is probably the last podcast before the 32 CFR CMMC final rule
is officially published.
All right, folks, the 32 CFR CMMC final rule was officially published on October 15th, 2024, and boy, is it a long one at 470 pages. It is double the length of the proposed rule that was published in December of 2023. Does that mean that the 200 extra pages worth of stuff is updates and changes to program requirements that continue to be in a constant state of flux and change that nobody can keep up with? Nope, not even close. And today we're going to talk about why.
2 years ago, we started a podcast. 2 years ago on my birthday, we started a podcast. 2 years ago today, we started a podcast. Happy birthday, me. Happy birthday from the DOD. And the reason why is because we have the final rule. Our loyal listeners that have been with us for that 2 years, this is a new era. For those listeners who just may have finally heard that CMMC is a thing and you are showing up trying to figure out what's going on, we have been expecting you. Welcome to the show. We will fill you in. Rest easy. We'll let you know what's going on. Jacob, I was very surprised. I was very surprised that it was large. I was very surprised at how large it was, even though we kind of anticipated it. But I was even more so surprised at the reason why it was so large. I thought that we were going to go through and there were going to be so many changes. And there were so many things that we were going to have to figure out what the change by change analysis was, how the new program was going to work. And realistically, it was 200 pages of, sir, this is a Wendy's.
That's right. That's right. So why is the final rule so long if not very much of the rule has changed since what we saw in December? And the answer is because of public comments. That's why the rule is so long. So in response to the 2023 proposed rule, DoD received over 1,800 public comments. In fact, 47% of the length of the final rule, roughly 220 pages, is spent summarizing and responding to public comments. Now, according to the final rule, and I quote, "The majority of comments received were relevant. Great job, everybody. But if you skim through the rule, you will quickly notice just how much time the department had to spend addressing comments that weren't relevant to the rule at all whatsoever in any shape or form. And thanks to the rules of rulemaking, the government must meaningfully consider and respond to all public comments that aren't pure spam, including comments that aren't even relevant to the scope of the rule. It took DoD 65,236 words to summarize and respond to all of the public comments that they received, and 64% of those words were DoD's actual responses. And while there were a lot of helpful details and clarifying information in those responses, if you skimmed the rule so far, which you really should have, it's been out for several days now, you probably noticed a clear pattern in those responses. The phrase "beyond the scope of this rule." Even if the majority of 1,800 public comments were relevant, that still leaves hundreds and hundreds of irrelevant comments having, inside the rule. And having read every one of the 1,877 individual sentences that DoD responded to public comments with, it is extremely clear that we got to wait over 10 months for a 220-page addendum that basically just explains all of the issues that people have incorrectly attributed as the responsibility of the CMMC program. So let's briefly explore the topics that were included in what is essentially the equivalent of a regulatory DDoS attack on progress of the CMMC program. Everybody ready? Here we go. Marking requirements for federal contract information or controlled unclassified information. Examples of the differences between basic CUI and specified CUI. The requirements of NARA's CUI program 32 CFR Part 2002. DoD's adherence to NARA's CUI program policies. the requirements for sharing of CUI with non-U.S. persons, DoD programs providing CUI training and the implementation of Executive Order 13556, incorporating authoritative DoD instructions and policy guidance regarding marking and handling CUI into the CMMC regulation, dialogues with industry to identify CUI, DoD's implementing policies for identifying and managing CUI, the classification, marking of existing DoD documentation, changes to FAR and DFARS requirements, discussions regarding acquisition strategies and frameworks, DoD instructions for required acquisition program documentation, the role of system engineering and associated processes within the DoD acquisition process, contractual remedies for noncompliance, how organizations seeking assessment manage varying contract requirements, questions on specific contracting matters, including contract costs, funding, and existing contract administration processes, recommendations to adopt standard DoD contracting procedures, such as excluding CUI information in the basic award, metrics for identifying the number of contracts with any specific DFARS clause, the applicability of and compliance with DFARS Clause 252, 204, 7020, the applicability of and compliance with DFARS Clause 252, 204, 7012, any modification, deviation from, or change to the DFARS Clause 252, 204, 7012, which was mentioned 4 separate times in the responses to public comments, the DoD CIO option for variances to NIST SP 800-171 requirements in DFARS Clause 252, 204, 7012, DoD's policies and procedures for the length of time allowed for proposal submission in response to any solicitation, questions regarding the application of CMMC requirements to specific transactions, including grants and OTAs, discussions of DoD's willingness to provide advance notice of CMMC requirements, rendering decisions on specific elements of data or otherwise modifying the definition of FCI in the Federal Acquisition Regulation for application to all executive branch agencies, removing the program manager's discretion to include the CMMC level that best suits program requirements, integrating the CMMC assessment process and internal defense acquisition system processes, including technical reviews prior to RFP development, the criteria by which contractors select cloud service providers for support, interactions between DoD contractors and their external service providers, an organization seeking assessments contractual rights with its cloud service provider, the requirements for cloud service providers that process, store, or transmit CUI pursuant to DFARS Clause 252, 204, 7012, the DoD CIO policy memo on FedRAMP moderate equivalency, comments related to applications hosted in FedRAMP moderate environments, any impact to the cost of servicing government customers across the DoD stemming from FedRAMP requirements for CUI, DoD's recognition of the standards of other nations that occurs through the negotiation of international agreements and arrangements, speculation about international agreements and how they may or may not impact international partners, engagement with the International Council on Systems Engineering and ISO certification organizations, exemptions or deviations for foreign businesses that must be addressed through government-to-government international arrangements and the pathways and timelines for achieving such agreements, potential exemptions to foreign ownership control or influence regulations that must be addressed through international arrangements or agreements, subsidizing the cost for the defense industrial base, comments recommending that funding be appropriated by Congress to provide the DIB with security solutions, the creation or expansion of grants and assistance programs, financial support for small businesses, the DoD procurement toolbox, the DoD Office of Small Business Programs, contract incentives, and free or reduced cost DoD cybersecurity services, how companies recover assessment costs, the cost elasticity of the defense industrial base, speculation on market forces affecting the defense industrial base, comments pertaining to solutions available from other federal agencies, DoD's organizational alignment of responsibilities between the Office of Small Business Programs and the Small Business Administration military offices for assisting small businesses or establishing new offices within the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense, comments regarding cybersecurity services that DoD provides free of charge, including PD&S, vulnerability scanning, and security alerts, the recommendation for DoD to establish a voluntary cyber protection program, the availability of government-furnished equipment for any particular contract, hardware and software approving authorities for government-furnished equipment, comments expressing a desire for grants to obtain zero trust solutions or other cybersecurity solutions, working with NIST and other regulatory authorities to align standards, changing the FIPS validation requirement in 31311 and NIST SP 800-171 Revision 2, specific security requirements contained in NIST documentation, collaboration between DoD and NIST about the cryptographic module validation program, defining cryptography-related organizationally defined parameters in NIST SP 800-171 Revision 3, the origination of NIST SP 800-171 Revision 2 from NIST SP 800-171 Revision 853 Revision 4. That was not me. My favorite topic. I did not submit that comment. That was not me. Comments and questions related to the background and development of scenarios included in NIST SP 800-171 Revision 2, granting alternatives to NIST SP 800-171 Revision 2, the process for identifying specific products or services that may meet NIST security requirements, implementation guidance for operational technology and Internet of Things devices, speculation on market forces affecting CMMC ecosystem roles such as CCPs and CCAs, limitations on career opportunities and associated issues such as burnout or job satisfaction for CCPs and CCAs, personnel actions taken by the CMMC AB and comments regarding the filing of IRS forms, speculative or editorial comments about private citizens or outside entities, which was mentioned 11 separate times in response to public comments. The number one thing that they had to tell people was not inside the scope of the rule. Speculative or editorial comments about private citizens or outside entities from the DoD. Anyways, speculative or editorial comments about downstream impacts of market reactions to CMMC. Comments about potential industry litigation, DoD's response to GAO and DoD IG reports, CMMC program effectiveness metrics, CMMC program return on investment calculations, DoD's calculation of ROI for the security controls that CMMC will assess, identification of the C3PAO staff that an organization seeking certification should interface with, updates to assessor training, statements made in training materials produced prior to the final adoption of the CMMC final rule, DoD determining the order in which organizations will be assessed, mentioned 3 separate times. DoD review of specific specialized assets for individual contractor environments, detailed explanations of the usage of risk-based terminology when implementing or assessing CMMC requirements, publishing DIBCAC assessment results, interactions between prime contractors and subcontractors. This does not involve the government, as emphasized by the DoD in their responses to public comments. Interactions between primes and their subs does not involve the government. The contents and updating of DoD's frequently asked questions and procurement toolbox web pages, concerns related to a CISA rule pertaining to cyber incident reporting, which according to the DoD should have been submitted instead to the relevant docket for that rule. Changing access to procurement integrated enterprise environment PIEE and the supplier performance risk system SPRS, recommendations to revise other government-wide or DoD policies and programs, federal and DoD requirements for the delivery of software bills of material of secure software development, comments on information sharing between other agencies and foreign entities, the details of joint surveillance assessments, a DCMA program, and any recommended changes to it, specific directions or guidance on recognition for alternate cybersecurity standards, comments on alternate risk mitigation strategies such as product monitoring or software testing, addressing the harmonization between DoD contractors and subcontractors, which according to the rule is the specific function of the DIB Sector Coordinating Council and the DIB Government Coordinating Council. Where you guys been at, everybody? The costs associated with a government-owned secret-level network, Klinger-Cohen Act requirements, which apply to DoD's IT investments as opposed to CMMC program requirements, which apply to contractor-owned information systems, comments pertaining to DoD's organizational structure mentioned multiple times, comments related to safe harbor provisions, efforts to define common carrier or other related terms by other agencies, export controlled goods and ITAR regulations, non-DoD programs, mishandling of information by the government, DoD's process of handling FOIA requests, other DoD initiatives related to secure service or software development environments, the structure and formatting requirements for proposed and final rules as prescribed by the Office of the Federal Register, the process for submitting comments as prescribed by the Office of Management and Budget. More than 100 different topics had to be summarized over the course of hundreds and hundreds of public comments. They had to spend months and months summarizing and collecting and categorizing all of these comments for all of these things that we just went through that are not relevant to the CMMC rule. We spent all that time waiting for a rule to change, and the last 85 pages of the rule, which are the actual regulatory text, are effectively identical to what they were almost a year ago, because so many of the public comments talked about things that are not relevant to the scope of the CMMC program policy itself.
Jacob, it took you 9 minutes to read off the list of the things that were quote unquote excluded from the rule. And I think people coming into this episode thought that we were going to talk about all the things the DoD missed on, the things that we thought were going to be in the rule that had to make this program go around, that the DoD just did not include in the rule, even with the revision period. But that list took you 9 minutes, and it took 9 months for the DoD to parse through that. And the crazy thing about it is we consistently talked about how much of a record-breaking, back-breaking, neck-breaking pace that this was taking, how things were moving faster and faster. Imagine if, and pardon my language, they didn't have to sift through all the irrelevant bullshit.
Listen, I'm happy that people participated. I think that we've done a lot on this show to raise awareness about the importance of submitting public comments, how to submit effective public comments. However, on
this show, the number one point that we made on the show was read the document you are commenting on. And it is apparent that there are 1,877 lines of answers to people that did not read the document. What is also very characteristic of some of the things that we read throughout that 200-page section, 50% of all the pages that we got, right? Something that was very characteristic is it was very reminiscent of conversations that we had with people that were like, CMMC is not a thing. CMMC is not something I need to worry about. CMMC is not something I'm going to do. And this is the reason why, because the DoD can't mark CUI appropriately, or the DoD can't control the flow down. The DoD does not have to control the flow down. We've been saying that for months as well.
Yeah. And I think, listen, it is what it is at this point. The bottom line is that the rule is twice as long as it was in December, but that doesn't mean that there's twice as much stuff involved with CMMC. The program, the requirements, how it's going to roll out are almost identical to the plan that they released in December of 2023. They just had to spend all this extra time making sure that everybody knew, one, to clarify the details of stuff that is relevant, but mostly to address all the things that aren't actually relevant. And the two things that really jump out to me in this list are interactions between DoD contractors and their external service providers, and interactions between prime contractors and their subcontractors. The DoD really emphasizes in their response to public comments that those two things are not the responsibility of the government. Who you, as a private company, decide to partner with in order to facilitate your compliance with these contractual cyber requirements is up to you. And how your prime contractor decides to push these requirements down to you, if they were push them down to you or at all, might not even be a thing that the DoD is aware of when they award the contract, which they say multiple times. So for everyone out there who is on the other side of a prime contractor dealing with these requirements, a lot of the issues that get brought up in the public comments to the DoD are questions that you should be bringing up during the webinars that the primes, I hope, are going to be holding about CMMC. What's their rollout plan? What's their phased implementation plan? What are their plans for dealing with CUI market? What are their plans for all of these comments, which are much more relevant to them and you than it is between you and the DoD?
Yeah, I think that there was and I think we talked about this quite a few times over the weekend, but there was a lot of times where I would read things within that section of the rule, and I would say that would be a great topic to bring up in the right venue, right? This would be a great issue to bring up about the marking of CUI, or this would be a great issue about the safeguarding requirements on certain CUI with NARA, right? Or this would be a great idea to bring up the contractual flow down or something to do with contractual flow down in the 48 CFR comments, which closed yesterday, right? Or today?
Yeah.
Today.
They closed on the 15th.
This week.
They closed on the 15th.
Yeah, this week. Yeah, so sometime this week. Yeah. And so there were a lot of instances where there were a lot of comments that were made, but it was just not relevant to a rule that is for the validation of the implementation of requirements.
100%. A lot of, as you said, not all of, but a lot of the irrelevant comments are great comments. They are great ideas. And I've seen this sentiment expressed around the ecosystem in the lead up to the close of the comment period on the 48 CFR rule, where people will just sort of say, oh, well, they're good ideas and they're valid comments, so we're going to submit them anyways, even though we know that this isn't the office or program responsible for the thing that we're about to comment on. When you do that, you are taking more time for the program to roll out, right? You are actively harming the ability for the program to execute because the government is obligated to stop, think about, summarize, and then respond to anything that you submit that isn't pure spam. So when everybody submits hundreds of comments about CUI marking to the CMMC program office, it takes 10 months for us to fire off the program that we published back in December, right? So you should participate in the program. We'll link below to how to craft effective comments for when the next comment period comes up on whatever rule is relevant to you. But please consider what is relevant within the text of the rule that you were submitting comments on. Okay, we've beat that horse to death already. It is what it is. Water under the bridge. We'll probably talk about it when the final 48 CFR rule comes out. But anyways, that's all the things that aren't relevant to the CMMC rule. If you're curious to know all of the things that are relevant to the CMMC rule and what the nature and structure and substance of the final regulation actually says, we are having a webinar, a big old party, and everybody is invited on November 7th. We will post the link below for you to register, and we will go over every single detail that's in the rule, what it looks like, how to visualize it, how to plan, how to strategize, everything that you need to know all in one convenient package. And we won't shame anybody about having comments that weren't relevant to the rule, I promise. In the meantime, if you're listening to this between now and the time that we have the webinar and you want to know how to get started, check out our website where we have our free Pathfinder tool, which is a simple questionnaire that will walk you through exactly the number of steps that you need to walk through in order to get started on your CMMC journey. Because if you weren't aware by now, the final rule has been published. We are in a post-rule world now. So if you haven't started, you really, really should check out that Pathfinder tool. And if you have any questions, obviously feel free to leave them in the comments here. We also do a live stream Q&A every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, streamed here on YouTube and over on LinkedIn. So check that out. If you have individual questions, you can DM us, you can leave it in the comments, you can show up live and chat about them. So lots and lots of resources for everybody to check out. There you go, everybody. See you next week.
See you next week.